This is the story of a church that has stood the test of time. A little white marvel on the shores of Madras, that is now Chennai. A church whose history is intertwined with the history of this city that grew on the sandy shores of the Coromandel coast. Join me as I trace 175 years of the history of the St. Thomas English Church.
How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will see how great is our God.
History records that St. Thomas, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ, once walked on these very shores. He was martyred at St. Thomas Mount and buried on this shore in 72 AD. In the early 16th century, the Portuguese landed on this shore. They built a fort here and named it Santhome due to the apostolic connection. Santhome grew into a European settlement adjacent to the traditional town of Mylapore. In due time, the Dutch, French and the English fought for the possession of Fort Santhome or Santhome as it came to be known by then, and it was finally ceded to the British in 1749. In the 1800s, Santhome was a sleepy suburb around the old Fort Santhome. The Europeans preferred the coastal air to the dry heat of interior Madras, and many built their houses here. Santhome was also a sanatorium for sick officers who came here to recuperate.
Most of the British had begun to move towards the Adaya side, and it became necessary to look at a church in the Adaya area. The Bepri mission, which was handled by the Germans for the SPCK, began to preach in the Santhome area, and it should be correctly pronounced Santhome. And in this area, worship began where today St. Thomas English Church is.
Worship services were conducted here in English on Sunday mornings and Tamil on Sunday and Wednesday evenings at a building where the CSI St. Thomas Tamil Church now stands. The year 1824 was an important milestone in the Santhome mission. Robert Carver, a Wesleyan missionary who was just recovering from the personal tragedy of losing his young wife in childbirth, was posted to Santhome from Jaffna, Ceylon. Santhome was then a neglected mission field of the Bepri mission, SPCK, but Robert Carver was about to change this. Robert Carver started his mission efforts in full earnest and soon became a favorite of the British residents, as well as the domiciled Eurasians and Indian Christians at Santhome. Carver was much liked personally, and he remained at Santhome for 13 years. In 1830, Bishop Turner of Calcutta visited Santhome. Seeing so many Europeans living there, he decided there needed to be a proper church for them to worship, and led by an ordained minister. Bishop Turner made a grant for the purchase of a site with buildings in a place called Bowyer's Tannery.
In the 1840s, it was decided to build a church in this area, and St. Thomas English Church came up and was consecrated in 1842.
On December 10, 1842, the church and the burial ground attached were consecrated by the Bishop of Madras, George Spencer, in the presence of the Metropolitan. Just 2 years later, in 1845, Robert Carver died of a brain fever resulting from a sunstroke and was buried under the altar of the St. Thomas Church. But Carver's legacy lived on as more and more people loved visiting this little white church on the shore.
This church catered mainly to the Europeans who lived in the Adaya areas and what is now Raja Annamalapuram and those areas. It was mainly catering to them. And with the governor, whenever he was in the Guindy governor's house, and on those days he would often worship at St. Thomas English Church.
Nearly 8 of the 12 memorial tablets here belong to army officers and their families who worshipped in this church around this period. This throws light on the profile of the congregation at that time. In 1868, St. Thomas English Church got its own single manual pipe organ built by Thomas Robson, and the records show it as the second oldest in the city of Chennai. Centenary celebrations were held in 1942 when the church turned 100, though not on a very large scale due to various reasons like the evacuation during World War II and a decline in the number of parishioners. When India gained independence in 1947, St. Thomas English Church came under the CSI Diocese of Madras but was allowed to continue its Anglican tradition.
The very first place my fiancée and I went out together was to St. Thomas English Church. I liked the church. It was full of trees. It was a simple church, and the service was beautiful, and I was very, very happy. Of all the memories, the happiest one happened at St. Thomas English Church. Why? Because Mahima and I were married in the church. That was the most happiest moment in my life.
In the 1950s, 60s and 70s, the congregation gradually turned fully Indian and many new families started worshipping at the Little White Church on the shore.
Way back in the early 1970s, on the Monday after Easter Day, traditionally every year they used to have an Easter sunrise service on the beach behind our church. Amazingly, it used to be very, very beautiful, gorgeous, pink and red, and over the sea, the sun used to come out as an orange globe. And the risen sun renewed our faith in the risen Son of God.
The 1980s saw a revival of sorts in the life of the St. Thomas English Church congregation. Stekwai was formed by the youth of the church, and it grew to be a powerful outreach arm. Funds were mobilized through 2 public concerts that were runaway hits of the times. The Anti-Drug Action Group, or ADAG, was started as a de-addiction program for substance abusers and alcoholics. It still runs as a clinic for the economically weaker sections of the society. The church school was started in 1985 with the main aim of imparting English medium education to the underprivileged children in the vicinity. Building churches for rural congregations has been an ongoing activity, as we have built new churches at R.S. Mangapuram, Arakonam East, Uliyambakam in Arakonam, Roshanagaram, Pichattur, etc. We also renovated a chapel and built a school in Atimancheripet, R.K. Nagar. During the devastating Chennai floods in 2015, the congregation came together as one and extended a helping hand to the needy and the affected with relief supplies. The many fellowship groups at St. Thomas English Church are very active. The men's fellowship meet on Saturday evenings for Bible study. The women's fellowship is very active in visiting the elderly, organizing the mission sale and other activities. The Rafa team visit hospitals once a month. The young adults meet on Sunday evenings for a brief study session on the Bible. The tweens are a formidable force who lead the praise and worship on special occasions. They meet on Sunday evenings too. Music has always been an integral part of the worship. Who can ever forget Seth Balasundar, who led the choir for almost 3 decades, from the early 1960s, and others like Richard Singh, who raised the standard of singing. The choir still continues the tradition with 3 special performances a year. Sunday School and Vacation Bible School have always been a very important ministry at STEC and has created many leaders who currently shoulder responsibilities in the church. Stella Wilson and Pramila Soundarapandian have been the driving forces behind this ministry that has grown in leaps and bounds. When our family moved to Madras in 1975, as teenagers, my siblings and I joined the choir and joyfully participated in all the choral productions. Today, as I look at the youth of the church, I am excited to see the next generation embodies the motto, abounding in faith, grace and love. And this promises a vibrant future for the St. Thomas English Church.
In the land